Good afternoon. My name is 12 Gauge. Welcome to my channel. I said I wouldn't do any more of the Idaho 4 case, but I'm going to do this because I was listening to this podcast on my vacation and it has a lot of great information regarding things that have been placed in a way that is understandable and it makes sense to the listener. It is not meant to sway one way or the other, or even discuss evidence, but merely just to understand the case being discussed in a different direction. Everything that is discussed here is merely for entertainment purposes. This is my opinion. I'm basically giving commentating on a stream or a podcast, which is supplying information based on a case. Let's begin.
In this Idaho murder case, the decision was made, right or wrong, to demolish that house. Do you have an opinion on that?
I can see no viable, tangible reason for that home to be destroyed before the trial is complete.
Is there an immediacy for a jury going to a house, psychologically speaking? I would say yes.
This is The Idaho Massacre, a production of KT Studios and iHeartRadio. Season 2, Episode 2, Murder House. I'm Courtney Armstrong, producer at KT Studios with Stephanie Lydecker and Gabe Castillo.
As you can tell, they're going to discuss the murder house, basically on the demolition, or their opinions on whether it should have stayed standing or demolished. A lot of individuals had their opinions on this. There was a lot of strong feelings about the house being demolished so quickly. And there are some that believe that it should have stayed standing until the trial so that the jurors could have potentially walked through the house and seen the crime scene. You have to ask yourself a question because many of the things that have happened since the house was demolished, will there even be a trial? Is there even going to be a need for the house to be around? Only time will tell.
We were reminded last episode of the details of the grotesque horror that occurred at 1122 King Road on November 13th, 2022, when Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle lost their lives. After the murders, it was seen by some as a forensic scene, or a tomb, or a macabre reminder of the horrors that happened there. But before all that, the house, located just off campus and on Fraternity Row, was full of life. It was a party house where friends gathered. Here's on-air reporter Anjanette Levy, who has covered the case on the ground since the very beginning. I asked her to describe the house and what it felt like standing in front of it.
This house makes me sad. And it made me sad because it was frozen in time. I'm standing there looking at this window, and there's a pair of pink cowboy boots in the window. When I was there in December of 2022 and then returned in early January after the arrest, what made me so sad is there was this string of lights across the back porch, and they were on. They were on. There was a couch out there, like this leather couch. As a mom, I'm like, what are you doing with a couch outside? But they're college kids, it's a college house. And this is a place where, it was a party house, but it was frozen in time in the worst possible way. The lights were on the entire time from the night this happened till I got back in January. And there's the couch covered in snow. And, you could kind of see into the kitchen. Everything stopped because this awful thing happened at this house that should have just been full of kids and laughter. And if they were going to not be there, it should have been because they were going home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Everything.
As we understood in some of the photos that have been shown throughout this investigation of this crime and YouTubers discussing it, we've seen that black couch sitting on the back porch in many of photos. We've seen the lights being strung up, symbolizing a happier time. It also, we saw barbecue pits on the side of the house. We saw, you know, a trash can full of trash that maybe had recently been thrown out. It was waiting to go to the dumpster. It's almost like she said, like time stood still. Many have speculated that the pizza box that was found in the trash or seen in the photos in the trash can was the pizza that was ordered the night of the murder. For speculatory reasons, it had been speculated that and stated that possibly Ethan and Dana had ordered pizza around midnight. And many people put together that the pizza box that was seen in the trash can was possibly that pizza.
Everything was shattered. That was my impression of it. I have mixed feelings about the demolition of the house. I understand that Ethan Chapin's family supported the demolition of the house because it had become this horrible, macabre tourist attraction, which I think is horrific. But at the same time, I would hate for something to come up at the trial where it was needed. So I see both sides of the coin.
As Anjanette says, there are two sides to this coin, and most people fall strongly on one side or the other.
The family of the only male victim, 20-year-old Ethan Chapin, saying in a statement, "We're supportive of the decision to take down the King Street house for the good of the university, its students, including our own kids, and the community of Moscow."
The house was considered the largest piece of evidence that they had.
The university defending their decision to move forward.
Our understanding is from a legal standpoint, everyone was finished with the house.
You kind of want to scream from the mountaintops, just let it be. Leave it alone. Don't touch it until the trial's over.
The house was...
And that was what a lot of people were discussing throughout before the house was demolished. What makes it so urgent to have to demolish this home? Why can't it just be left standing? At the wording that was used just right there about the macabreness of the house just standing there, well, I believe that when they put the plyboards up, it made the house look even less appealing on the neighborhood. Had they left the plywood down, possibly it wouldn't have entertained a lot of individuals to want to get close to it. Because anytime that you try to keep people out of something, it's almost like an unwritten duel for them to get into it.
ultimately demolished on December 28, 2023. It took one day and occurred 13 months after the murders. Shortly after the demolition, Stephanie has a discussion with forensic expert Joseph Scott Morgan and data analyst Body Movin'. You may remember her from Netflix's Don't F with Cats.
The particular house that they were murdered in was very specific. It was a unique layout, but the house itself was owned by the campus, and highly debated turn of events. They decided to destroy the house, to get rid of it altogether over winter break. And it's been a really heated discussion. On the one hand, you know that for the university, it's a bit of a real heartbreak on the town, on the school, also for students who went there who were maybe triggered emotionally by this heinous crime that happened while they were attending school. Just generally speaking, probably just feels hideous to have this marker exist. And on the flip of that, some of the family members, including some people participating in the trial, say that this is an active investigation site and that from a forensic standpoint, it has to stay intact, at least until after the trial.
I spend a lot of time on the internet, as you all know. That's what I do. And I talk to a lot of people who live in Moscow, and they are all affected by this house. They have to drive by it. It's in a really dense neighborhood. The jury is never going to be allowed to go in there. They're never.
So, having to drive by that house, what would you have to do in order to be triggered, so to speak, as you're driving by that house? That house was a block away from Taylor Avenue, while Linta was behind the house. So, you're driving by on these two streets. Even once the house is gone, you're still going to have the memory of what the house looked like if you lived there in that area for any period of time during that year or even before. So I don't understand the whole triggering effect of it. That has to be something that came up as something new, because in a lot of crimes, they have demolished the home in which the crime occurred.
Never going to be allowed to go in there. The acoustics are different. Flooring's been removed. Walls have been removed. I have photos, and you can see all the drywall that's been cut out of Maddie's room. Like, they're not going to go in there. It's just not going to happen. It's so uncommon for a jury to visit a crime scene. So uncommon.
But it happens, though. By the way, sidebar, one of the victims has a sister and a brother who do also still attend the university. So if I'm a family member of one of the victims, I want justice. Or if I'm even a family member of the accused and I want justice, how can we destroy the forensics?
Here's my real problem with it is the fact that there are homicides that take place every single day. There's a homicide going on right now as we speak somewhere in America. I can promise you that. They're not going to go out and tear down that structure. This is an outlier as far as tearing down a structure.
It is incredibly rare for a jury to visit the site of a murder. It's also rare for a building where a murder took place to be demolished. However, the ones that fall into either category are usually multi-victim murders that are exceptionally heinous and highly publicized. Some cases where the juries did go back to the literal scene of the crime can often include cases where they may hinge on some form of integral spatial logistics. For example, Michael Peterson, where jurors walked the stairs where his wife died. Alex Murdaugh, so jurors could appreciate the scale of the large property. And the 2018 Parkland school shooting, which Joseph tells us about.
I even reflect back to Parkland, which I covered extensively. And look, I understand that the interior of Parkland was not changed at all. One of the most moving moments is where they talk about how when they led the jurors into that structure, remember Parkland had taken place on Valentine's Day. There were dried, crumbling roses laying on the floor, teddy bears with hearts on them. There were still bloodstains on the floor. And it too is government controlled. And let's face it, the University of Idaho is a government entity, and it is owned by the University of Idaho.
Of all the divisive factors in this divisive case, it seems the home's demolition drew more opposing opinions than almost anything else. Here's journalist Chris Spargo, who spent a lot of time covering the case. I started by asking him about the money spent on security of the home leading up to the demolition. It was $700 a day for securing the home alone, clocking in at $1.2 million months before the home was even torn down.
So this tells you a lot about the financial aspect of it. So anybody can make up an excuse or a reason for something to occur or need to occur, and then it finally occurs, and then you're like, okay, that makes sense. Let's move on from there. But monetarily, that's money that whoever had to pay for this obviously was getting tired of paying for it. And that seems to be the catalyst behind most things these days is money. It's okay as long as somebody else is paying for it, but when you have to start to pay for something, that it becomes very expensive very quickly. So I would believe that this is probably one of the reasons why it was pushed so fast and so hard to get torn down.
Here's Chris.
The brunt of that is really being absorbed by the university. The university has really kind of cost a lot of money for them because of security reasons. Obviously, when the house was up for so long, and that house had to be protected that entire time. People, they had 24/7 watch, dealing with this influx of people on campus. Safety measures for students. There's not really much you can do to get around those costs. And because it took place in a university, there's a lot of costs that come along with that because they want to make sure the students feel safe. They want to make sure the students feel protected, and they also want to make sure that this major piece of evidence, this house, is left untouched, when there are thousands of people descending on this town who probably want to do nothing more than to get inside it or take a look around. They have to make sure no one went in that house. So that was a really, really big cost to bear.
What are
The students are protected, and what are they protected from? Why would you need to put a guard on this house where a crime happened and protect the students from what? The student that live around there? What are you protecting them from? Because I believe it was 64 days, and then the perpetrator was apprehended, at least the suspect in this crime, whether people believe he is the one or not. There was a suspect apprehended, so they continued to watch this home after the fact. What were they protecting it from? And what would people really get from going into that house? I mean, honestly, they'd take some pictures, whatever. But in reality, most of the evidence was already out of it, supposedly. There was a cleaning crew that came through there for a little bit, and then they were shut down. Obviously, the police went through there with chemicals and everything and cleaned or investigated for evidence. All this stuff was taking place in that house. What would people actually see that other people didn't want seen?
your thoughts on the demolition of the house?
I do not think that the defense or prosecution would be okay with it if they thought there was any possible chance there was even like a little piece of evidence inside there. I think on the most sort of human and basic level, the last thing in the world you want those kids to deal with, which we're already dealing with so much, is to have to see that house. It's probably a horrible reminder. So for that reason, I'm really glad, that it's not there. I don't know how much the scene was going to be helpful in that case. At this point, it seems like they're having trouble even placing him at the scene. So I don't know what was going to be accomplished maybe by having anyone visit the house. But like I said, I think that if there's any sort of bit of evidence that prosecutors thought they could get out of it or bringing people to the house, they would have kept it up. And clearly they didn't think there was that there.
The FBI, prosecution, and defense teams had access to the home on multiple occasions. The prosecutor's last visit was just 1 week before the demolition. The president of Idaho University, Scott Green, released a statement on December 14th, 2023. He wrote, "It is the grim reminder of the heinous act that took place there. While we appreciate the emotional connection some family members of the victims may have to this house, it is time for its removal and to allow the collective healing of our community to continue." Let's stop here for...
So, okay, when that guy drowned in that shallow waterway, whatever it was called, by that bridge, or froze to death under that bridge, there was two of them. Ludlow or something, one of them, when he drowned in that shallow water, they didn't tear that stream down. When that other guy died from hypothermia under the bridge, not far from there, they didn't tear the bridge down. So what made this so imperative to tear down? What's the difference? If you're going to tear something down because of a reminder, you know what the difference is? You can rebuild on this land. You can rebuild something that the university can make use of because it is their property now. So it would be imperative to have to tear it down. That way we could get on with it. People can forget about it. We can rebuild something there. And we can start getting the money back that we lost due to paying for the security that was there 24/7.
break. We'll be back in a moment.
In Texas, the future belongs to everyone, so we built the trucks of the future for everyone. Ford F-Series trucks are made to make the toughest of tasks look easy. Plus, they're fitted with the latest tech to help keep you safe and confident out on the road. It's just part of what makes Ford F-Series the best-selling trucks in America for 47 years. And what makes Ford the best in Texas. Head to your Best in Texas Ford dealer today for exclusive offers on F-Series trucks and the full Ford lineup, based on 1977-2023 CY total sales.
Every day in Odessa, our feline friends are being killed. In fact, only 3 out of 10 cats who entered Odessa Animal Services last year made it out alive. But there is hope, Odessa. Join Best Friends Animal Society and urge city leaders to implement Trap, Neuter, Vaccinate, Return. This program is a humane and effective way to reduce community cat populations while freeing up shelter resources and saving cats' lives. Odessa deserves better for our cats. Take action at bestfriends.org/Odessa.
Since 1979, TireRack.com has been helping people find the right tires for how.
Stephanie continues her conversation with forensic expert Joseph Scott Morgan and data analyst Body Movin.
Once it's gone, it's gone. The most intriguing images that I saw of the entire coverage relative to Idaho was there was a snap moment where you had agents that were back in the brush line, rear of the second floor where the sliders are, and they were squatted in the brush, and they were looking back towards the building. They were looking for fields of view at that point in time. What could you observe from this low growth scrub that was back there, these trees? Is it a location where the perpetrator could have parked? Is it an observation point where they could have seen people moving around at night? Is it at that key moment that he decided that when those lights went down, that he was going to make his move and make entry into that environment? Already.
That being said, one thing that I haven't really heard other people talk about is the fact that it could have been numerous people spying on that house. How many people that went into that house at any particular point with a friend, with a girlfriend, with a boyfriend, whoever? We obviously think it's a male because of the DNA or the profile. But how many males have attended that house to party, to hang out, to drop by and see people? So all I would have taken was you walking back to your car and noticing, hey, there's no blinds up in these windows. I could come back anytime I wanted and just check it out. But that's never been introduced as any kind of other information because that's too far fetched in people's eyes. It had to be one person and one person only. Or if it wasn't one person, it were the people that lived in the house. The most obvious scenario, right? But this gentleman is saying they were squatting down to view the trajectory of visual understanding of the outline of the place. So they were looking to see, would somebody have parked here? Would somebody have came here and watched, observed, and waited? And as they were doing that, then they started putting, I guess, the pieces together to the visual components that supposedly they had regarding a car. And it wasn't a car that was viewed as a suspect car at first in the realm that people taken it. Suspect vehicle number one. This car was looked at in the beginning as just the car of, let's say, they were looking to talk to the owner or the individuals in this vehicle just to see if they knew anything. But since they couldn't get a hold of these individuals or nobody came forward, Then all of a sudden, other things started to pop off.
Reference for that is gone now.
Not to mention, a big piece of the defense's case right now is that Brian Koberger claims to have an alibi. Again, we're talking about potentially more than one person being there or a different set of people being there. Were there multiple attackers? Was Brian not even there in the first place? Why would you destroy something? And I've learned this from you, by the way. The plumbing could have evidence in it. The concrete in and around the location could have evidence in it.
Yeah, let me say something about the plumbing real quick, and this brings the car into play. They think they've got the timeline settled here, but let's just say that an individual may have taken time to have gone and cleaned themselves. Did you take drain traps out? Did they run a camera down in the drain? I think my big thing is, and anybody that's kind of listening to us, our friends out there, if you live in a home that has an internal staircase, what do footfalls sound like on the treads on the interior staircase? Can you hear that? Can you hear somebody wrestling about if you're on the second floor and it's going on the third floor? Can you hear it if you're in the basement? We don't have a point of reference anymore. Still can't take the jury back out there. You can't have them go into any one of these rooms where these ghastly murders were committed and ask questions. Jury can't ask a question based upon, well, gee, look at that window and how you can see in from there to here. And how far away is the distance from the entrance to the bedroom to the flight of stairs down to the second floor? How long would it take me to egress from the third floor to the second floor landing and then down the hallway?
You think
Exactly. You can't do that anymore. The 360 digital component that they did, it's not going to be able you're not going to be able to hear from Dylan's room up to the third floor of supposedly how the floor sounded, or whether you could hear somebody running or walking down the steps. What was going on during that period of time? Everything that was stated in the PCA, it's unable to be done now that the house is gone. And people have said that, and I agree. I mean, whether they would have went in there or not, still to hear things gives you a perception of whether the statement was true that the surviving roommate gave, or was it fabricated? Because you can say, well, you can't hear that from this direction, or how could she have heard this, but she couldn't have heard that? It just gives you a perceptional view on the outer lay of the home.
think about the feeling it conjures. We saw that in Pike County.
Stephanie's referencing the murders of 8 members of the Roden family that occurred in Piketon, Ohio. It's the topic of another KT Studios podcast and a case we worked closely on with Joseph.
After the massacres occurred there and right before the trial, the jury was put on a bus and set
Yes, they were.
out to observe the landscape where the homes where those murders happened had occurred. And, we were always told it was extremely powerful. There's nothing like being in the location, especially when it's still furnished and those personal belongings that have now been removed for sentimental reasons, they should remain in that crime scene to really make it personal. That's part of it. This is the most personal thing imaginable. Why would you make a game day decision a year before the game by destroying what could potentially be relevant? Doesn't this speak to the original point that the house should not have been destroyed?
My point in this is, I can see both sides. The other side would have been the photos, the videos, the 360 outline of the home, the video component of it. But that still doesn't give you a firsthand perspective. You seeing something on a TV or a video screen is not going to do justice to you seeing it in real life. Perception is everything. One thing that I've heard people say countless times over and over is this house looks like a big house when you're looking outside of it, on the side of it, and things like that. But they say once you get close to it, the people that have been on the ground close to the home, they say that it's really wasn't that big of a home. It was taller than wider, so it wasn't that big of a home. So if it wasn't that big of a home, then what all went with the demolition?
This is just my opinion, but these scans are so advanced and so well done. The house is unsafe for people to be in. And I don't know what kind of situation the rooms are in, but I can't imagine they didn't remove pieces of the floor from both bedrooms. It's not safe for this jury to be in. Well, and that's what the documents say. The documents say the house was too dangerous. And both the defense and the prosecution agreed that this is not a place that they're going to be bringing the jury.
I do hope that it was sufficiently documented. I know that they did do Faro images within that structure and also externally.
We asked Joseph for clarification on what Faro images are and how the Faro system works.
You first see the earlier iterations of these things when they're referred to as total stations. They were made famous by accident reconstructionists, where you have this one machine that they could essentially plot from a digital standpoint a motor vehicle accident, because to work a motor vehicle scene is, to say the very least, time consuming, and the calculations are mind blowing. So they took that platform and expanded it relative to this Faro device, Faro. But you can take this Faro device and place it at a scene and just imagine it's got the ability to spin on its axis thousands of different directions, and all of the while it's shooting out these little lasers and it's taking thousands of photos. And so it can digitally take those images and compile them, and it gives you very detailed information. It also has GPS that's in it. You take it into a confined space like a built dwelling like this, and the detail is very remarkable, and you can create this 3D world. It is quite fascinating to see. So that's what a Faro station is essentially. There's
So my thing about, the house being torn down is what was left behind. Because when we did see it torn down, um, you didn't see any pipes. Was that was that taken out during was there things taken out of the home? Is that why it was covered up? Is that why the wood was on the outside of the wall or on the outside of the home, because they were taking out the pipes, the toilets, the shower heads, all that stuff? Were they continuing to do investigative measures that way? Were they investigating while in the house with it all boarded up? Were they doing that kind of incognito, investigating slash removing things to make sure that they got everything out of there? So when it was torn down, they would have got every piece of evidence that they needed out of that home.
been some talk of some 3D model that may be created by the FBI lab in Quantico and be presented for the court. But I got to tell you, I've been out on a number of visits to homes where homicides have taken place, and I've been there when the juries are there. And it is the real dose of reality for them when they show up. From an investigative standpoint, if you have it, don't throw it away. I'm not a junk collector personally, but this ain't junk. This is where these lives ended.
And just, to piggyback on that, some of the other victims' families were very against it for this very reason. What if there is one little morsel of something that could bring justice to them, or frankly, get a guilty man off?
There's other cases where they've torn the apartment down, like, for instance, Jeffrey Dahmer. However, they waited for the trial.
Yeah, that's the rub.
So yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, John Wayne Gacy's house is gone. There's nothing.
But Faro
Yeah,
didn't really exist like it does now back then.
that's true.
It's a different time. And I would imagine at some point, it's going to be virtual reality, where these juries can put on a headset and walk through the house at their leisure.
They can, but you had mentioned
Oh.
earlier about the acoustics might not be the same. However, people that are impaneled on juries, they're not AI. I mean, they are living, breathing human beings that know what it's like to walk into a house, and that sense that you get, that auditory sense of a footfall. And I know that
Understand what he's saying, and also like anybody who's been watching this case at all in that area or around the world has seen videos where they've, that one video where they're pretending to be each other. You heard people walking up the stairs, you heard people walking down the stairs, you heard them stomping across the floor, you heard the acoustics of their voices, and also, you know, um, you saw the outlines and the diagrams of the home. But that still does not give you what it was like on the night of the 13th from approximately, I would say, 3 to 5. Even though they say the murders happened 4 to 4:28 total, I would say 3 to 5.
that part of the floor has been removed and all this, but when you think about just the timing element, if I were asked, how long would it take me to make it from the sliders to that weird that if we just go on a limb here and say enter through the sliders, how long would it take to make it from there to the interior staircase and twist and turn and get up there? And also in the darkness. I think about all of these in the relationship, spatial relationships and all these sorts of things. And yeah, I know Faro is great, and it's going to be fantastic. I'm sure the presentation will blow everybody away if we're permitted to see it. But there's still that one little splinter in my
The
brain.
feeling. I often equate it to, like, I like to read books, like the actual book. I don't wanna read it on a Kindle. It's like I like to touch the paper, I like to turn the page. So
Yeah.
it's maybe the same kind of, like,
Right.
thing where you're there in person and you can smell and use all your senses to get an idea of what happened, and you're not gonna be able to have that with a 3D scan.
The draw to the house after the murders is one of the reasons it was demolished. People were coming from far and wide to view the house, some with the horrible intention of taking a souvenir from the scene. We felt it was something important to try and understand, so we reached out to psychiatrist Dr. Gail Saltz, clinical associate professor of psychiatry at New York Presbyterian Hospital and host of the podcast, How Can I Help? Dr. Saltz had been quoted in an article we found about our culture's obsession with murder houses. Here's Dr. Saltz with some information about the phenomenon, followed by Stephanie.
The house is sort of like the museum of it. It's easier to imagine being part of it or in it or thinking about it, the horror of it. Much like if you said, here are the clothes of the people, or here is the weapon that was used, and you can physically look at it and hold it. And of course, homes represent all kinds of things. Homes represent the place where these people lived and had lives, and most people's homes means feeling safe and feeling joy of whatever it might be, their family, their friends. I mean, in this case, right, their friends, being in college, feeling invincible at that age. And of course, most people are not thinking about you could be a victim in your home.
It's like, how do we prevent these kinds of things from happening? Or how do we maintain our own sense of safety when sometimes the perpetrator is so ordinary?
Many people have a desire to feel a little scared in a safe way. And we are naturally curious. The identification is partially with a victim of like how horrible the horror of that is, right? To feel like at that last moment, somebody stabbing me with a knife, like those kinds of thoughts, and imagining what's inside that guy's head that he would plot this and plan this and want to do something terrible
I believe this is why the fascination with this case has gone on for so long. Is that people try to place themselves in that situation. Like they say, there's no way Dylan could not have heard more than she heard, or how did Bethany not hear anything that we know of? What was being heard during those last moments of these individuals' lives? Because if Dylan didn't hear anything, what would have made Xana come out of her room other than the DoorDash order? And was that something that was kind of like a setup? Was that a setup to get her out of the room? Make sure that she would be out of the room? You just never know. I mean, you just never know what all collaborated that night. It seemed to have gone off without a hitch, though, other than the nice sheath being left behind and all the video evidence that they supposedly have. But it just seems so odd that there were so many circumstantial things going on around it all at once.
In this Idaho murder case, interestingly, the decision was made, right or wrong, to demolish that house. Do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, there are rules and regulations about what can happen with evidence that it can't be brought into a courtroom. And that seems like more of a legal question.
To get that legal opinion, I spoke with Kirk Nerby, legal analyst and former defense attorney for Jodi Arias. Jodi Arias was on trial in 2013 for murdering her ex-boyfriend, Travis Alexander. The trial was televised worldwide and became known as a circus in the press. Here's Kirk.
I can see no viable, tangible reason for that home to be destroyed before the trial is complete. The jury may have questions. Part of the evidence against Mr. Kohlberger is this eyewitness testimony of seeing someone with bushy eyebrows. There's been talk of hearing footsteps from upper levels, things of that nature. And those could be issues and questions that the jury has in their mind. How could someone see these eyebrows under these circumstances? Could they really hear this? All these different things. And there could be dozens more that I have not thought of. And here you have this piece of evidence and it is destroyed for no logical reason. Let's say something came up with the defense case and the defense said, hey, we need to look at this. And that becomes a Sixth Amendment issue. Is Mr. Kohlberger getting a fair trial based on these circumstances? And that could result in a death verdict getting overturned. But right now, until the case is over, it seems nonsensical, to say the least, to destroy the building.
Well, that's a concrete answer, but it seems like the people who might have most wanted it taken down might then impact the victims negatively if, for example, a sentence is overturned because of it.
Great point. You know, could the house being torn down eventually impact a guilty verdict versus an innocent verdict or vice versa? Because could the house not being there and you not really, let's say you have a juror that really needs to see the visual and the 3D imaging, the photos, all this other stuff is just not enough. And you can't convince them one way or the other. So therefore, you have 1 against 11. That could be a potential mistrial. That was a good point.
Yes, we don't know what could pop up, what could be of evidentiary value down the line when things are challenged, when things are questioned. So, yeah, to me, it just makes no sense, at least as it relates to the case in general, and could only serve to harm the case.
Let's stop here for another break. We'll be back in a moment.
Compelling about this case is that they hauled off the mattresses in the back of a pickup truck. They can still bring these items into court, and that has occurred. They can actually have been in courts where they set beds up before. Here's the real rub with that. If you're talking about dynamic blood stain, you can say, here's the mattress that we recovered, here's the bed frame that we recovered. We see this deposition of blood on the surface of the mattress. Maybe they hold up a bloody sheet. If that happens, you're going to hear the defense scream from the rooftops over this because they're going to say it's prejudicial. The prosecution is going to have to justify their rationale for bringing each one of these items in there. And the defense, I guess, could see it as prejudicial, but they could also argue the idea that now that they are absent that's something that they can not go back and collect. It's real important that we remember, I think, that they were so eager, they being the investigative authorities, to get this place cleaned out, that they had called a cleaning crew to come and clean up the structure before. It almost happened simultaneously with the arrest of Koberger in Pennsylvania.
Joseph is referring to when Brian Koberger's defense attorney, Ann Taylor, filed a court motion to stop the cleanup operation to preserve the scene of the crime. This motion.
So what that individual just stated is, they could bring in the mattresses in the trial to show the jury exactly what the evidence looked like, and that makes sense too. Even if they moved to remove that, the jury's already seen it. They've seen the mattress. They could possibly see the bed sheet. They could see the bed. Why would you need the flooring? You could see exactly what side of the bed had the most substantial blood on it. Base it on the crime scene photos or the videos or even the 3D imaging. Could give you a lot of stuff there.
Was filed on December 30th, 2022, just hours after Koberger's arrest.
And if I remember correctly, it was his counsel that said, whoa, throw the brakes on. We need to get a team out there to take a look. And I'll never forget seeing that image of the plastic that had been taped up over the door so that they could go in and move out and all this stuff. And then there was a controversy of taking out, quote unquote, personal items. And, once you've kind of breached, that threshold so quickly in this environment, there's not a damn bit of sentimental material that is out there that's worth compromising this. Because, yeah, I know that it's ghastly. It's a horrible thing, but life is full of all kinds of horrible things. This, I think, is potentially a diminishment of the memory of these kids that were killed there. But now it's too late at this point. You can't go back and unring the bell.
Stephanie continues her conversation with psychiatrist Dr. Gail Saltz on how a jury might be impacted by the home's demolition. Here's Dr. Saltz.
Is there an immediacy for a jury going to a house, psychologically speaking? I would say yes, that it's going to stir their thoughts in a more emotionally galvanizing way, and that will draw them in. But it doesn't tell you whether it will draw them in and make them say guilty or innocent. And now, where I think it could affect them is if they are convinced that this person is the perpetrator and they are brought into a circumstance that makes them feel more emotionally distraught. I think that could affect a sentencing like death, no death. And this is why prosecutors bring in photos and movies and voice recordings, because, they are trying to not only deliver content, but they are trying to deliver more immediacy, deliver more empathy to a jury, and have them feel more intensely and stronger about what's happening. I think being in a house certainly could add to that. It's not the only thing that could add to that. I think there was a point made that the house didn't look at all inside anymore the way that it looked. And so That could have the opposite effect, right? They could go in expecting to see something that looks like college students are living there and see none of that, see a sterile space. And that could have the effect of making them feel like, what was so bad? What was so terrible? So it's hard to predict whether that would be helpful or harmful.
I hadn't thought of it that way. True. The disassociation from what is now a different space is a really good point.
Of course, that is an excellent point. You go in, you look at it, and it doesn't resemble a college house anymore. It resembles a gutted up home with pieces of it missing, where it just looks like a renovation being done rather than something that tragically happened there. And your perception will be not favored one bit. It would be like, this is just a renovation. This is not a murder scene. Great point.
What I would say is virtual is always one step removed from being in person. I think courts have discovered that putting things in a video format absolutely makes an impact. Is it eked out by the idea that you're coming out of the courtroom and into this space and you know that you're standing on the spot where this thing happened? I think that has a more emotional impact. Is it necessary if you have the video? Might the video of what the inside looked like at the time that it actually looked that way, which was at the time of the crime, have more impact than the physical plant that doesn't look any more like it did at the time of the crime? It might.
Next time on the Idaho Massacre, an exclusive interview with Cassie, a former student of accused murderer Brian Koberger's.
So, I hope you enjoyed that rendition there. I'm going to play you a little bit about the Faro imaging here so that you can see exactly how it's done. And then I will conclude my live stream. And here we go. That wasn't very long, but it gave you kind of like an image of what it looked like. Let me show you again. It gave you an image on what it would look like overhead as you're backing out. Is it just as good as being there? No, I wouldn't think so. See, it gives you almost like a Sims rendition of the place. But you're able to see exactly how it looks overhead. Like if you were looking down on the crime scene, you would be able to see everything. Like looks like a weapon, looks like somebody down there. I'm sure it's a lot clearer than this. But this is the homeowner, this is the intruder, so obviously you got shot. And it looks like there's bottles there. There's the kitchen area. It's different. See, it gives you the outline of the yard. So if you were going to look at 1122, this would be the slider and it would be the trees and everything else in the backyard, I'm sure. It is descriptive. I mean, there's plenty of you're able to see everything as it looks. I mean, and I'm sure that's what you're going to see at the tags of all the other evidence that was collected. This is really good stuff. It's different, like I said. But see, there's the intruder. There's the bed. It goes down. You can see the shoes. Even a photo in the window. I mean, it's very descriptive. It's almost like a pause. Of course, in this crime, you're going to see them on the beds and one on the floor, as they were stated to be. I don't know if you'll be able to see the blood. So I don't see any blood on here. But let me play this from here on out. That is very interesting to me. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's IDAHO4 series that I'm starting. I'm basically giving commentary to this podcast, which has a lot more information than YouTube videos do, or News Nation and all that other stuff. It's actually listening to professionals discuss their thoughts on certain aspects of the criminal activity or the crime. Hope you enjoyed it. Maestro, cue that music.